Welcome to Catching Up with Council. I'm your host, Dan Monroe. I am pleased to have joining me today Ward 13 Councilman Kris Harsh. Councilman, thank you so much for being here today.
Dan, thanks for the invitation. This is fun.
You know, I want to learn some stuff about you. Before we talk about 13, I want to know what your life was like before council. I know you did a lot in the public housing sector.
Yeah.
You were the housing director for the Metro West Community Development area. What's
Correct.
that all entail, working in housing like that?
Yeah, I worked for 30 years before getting into city council, so I've had a lot of jobs, but the years prior to taking office, I did spend 7 years at Metro West as the housing director. Metro West covers the Clark Fulton, Stockyards, and Brooklyn Center neighborhoods, so just north of Old Brooklyn where I represent. So I worked on affordable housing projects, I worked on housing rehab projects, I worked with homeowners who were looking for resources to take care of their own issues. In the process of being there, I got a real estate license to help facilitate some transfers for people who were particularly low income and didn't really have the ability to hire a real estate agent. So I worked as a nonprofit real estate agent, didn't charge people for the services. And I also got licensed up in state lead risk assessment. So towards the end there, I was doing some lead clearance exams and working with landlords to try to make sure their units were lead safe, and really just learning all about housing markets and how the interaction of nonprofit and for-profit housing sectors make up the lay of our neighborhoods.
So how does that 30 years of experience then help you right now as councilman?
I hope it helps a lot. I kind of got to know the neighborhood pretty well. I mean, even before this, I was a cab driver for a couple of years. I painted houses for a couple of years. I rappelled off skyscrapers downtown washing windows, and just sort of got to know the city in different ways. Mm-hmm. Every job I had taught me a little bit more about Cleveland. I'm not from here, so I came here in 1998 when I was 21. So I've lived over half my life in Cleveland, but I've spent most of those years working around town in different capacities and really just getting to know the people. There was a big chunk of my life where I was a community organizer and then a coalition organizer and ultimately a union organizer with the American Federation of Teachers. So I spent a lot of time in the neighborhoods listening to people tell me about the community and what their aspirations are for Cleveland, as well as their struggles. So that background really is what informs me in my work in council.
So then at what point during all this did that thought come to your head, this is the next progression for me to run for council? How did that all come about to even think about running for office? Yeah,
it certainly wasn't something I thought about in my 20s or my 30s. My council person was Kevin Kelly, who did a very good job for Old Brooklyn. And I never would have ran against him, but I was a member of the Democratic Ward Club. And I remember in 2020, 2019, maybe in there, I started asking him, like, are you seriously running for mayor? Is this going to happen? Or are you just still thinking about it? And ultimately, when he did make the decision to run for mayor, he left his seat open. He didn't appoint somebody. He didn't pick his successor. He just said, he's going to leave it up to the people. And I talked to him about it and said, I'm thinking about running for your seat. He said, that's probably a good idea. You should give it a shot. So I discussed it with my wife for about a week. We really kicked it over because becoming a public figure means there's certain things that, some privacy aspects that you have to sort of, learn to accept. And I wanted to make sure she was comfortable with it. So we talked about it a number of times and sat on it for about a week. But ultimately decided that it would be good for us as a family, good for that I think I could help the neighborhood and do some good things. So decided to make the run for it in January or February of 21.
And you won.
Yeah, it did well. It worked out.
So 2 years now it's been on council. Talk about your first year as a freshman and even then how you've grown and changed into that role and taken on that role as councilman.
Yeah, I feel like I was pretty well prepared for the job. I had some concept of what council people did over at Metro West. We shared office space with the council person over there, who at the time was Brian Cummins, and I would watch the way they operated. They were literally across the hall. So I could kind of see how that worked, and I would spend a lot of time in housing court with Judge Pianka back then, but also in the Board of Zoning Appeals and Board of Building Standards at City Hall. So I got some interaction with council members and saw how they did their job. And I think I had a pretty good concept of what I was getting into. I think the thing that's probably changed the most is when I started, my goal was to get everything off my plate as quickly as possible. When a call came in, I wanted to handle it immediately, get it into the right hands or resolve it myself, and then be done with it. And now that the resolving problems doesn't keep up with the rate that they come in, so there's a little bit of triage that goes on where you have to prioritize your time and figure out what really needs immediate attention versus what can hold off a couple of days. So that's sort of my big adjustment in what I guess my sophomore year.
Still enjoying it?
Oh yeah, it's great. The job had, for every challenge, there's 2 more rewards. So I have no regrets. I'm looking forward to doing this, and I'm happy that the people of Old Brooklyn chose me to represent them.
Well, let's look at Ward 13 a bit. Is it mostly just Old Brooklyn?
Yeah, the website says stockyards, but honestly, we could ask every single person that lives in the area they call stockyards, and I don't think any of them would say they live in the stockyards. There's a senior community, a manufactured home community up off Ridge Road. That is my northwest corner. But they're tucked away back between a bus garage and a cemetery, and I don't know if they consider themselves stockyards or not. There's a couple of residential houses on the east side of Ridge over by the transfer station. I love the stockyards. I did spend years working there, and I have a lot of good friends that live there. But I think that I represent Old Brooklyn. There's 35,000 people in the Old Brooklyn neighborhood. I've got 25,000 of them, and the other 10,000 are sliced off into Ward 12. So it's mostly Old Brooklyn.
Mostly Old Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Let's let's talk about housing in Old Brooklyn. You know, there's a lot of housing going on now, but there's also some new housing projects going in, or not projects, but housing developments going in.
Yep.
Talk about all that. How's it going, and where do we stand today?
Yeah, this is really exciting. Old Brooklyn is a middle neighborhood, is the modern term for it. We are neither terribly poor nor terribly rich. We're a middle-class, working-class community. And as such, we get overlooked a lot in terms of development dollars because we're not the hot, trendy neighborhood, but we're not down on our luck and in need of, millions of dollars in public infusion of development money. So we do struggle sometimes to get that new coat of paint or a new project, but it's very exciting. In the 2 years I've been here, I've been able to secure just shy of $6 million for this project at the corner of Memphis and Pearl, which is going to be the largest development in Old Brooklyn in 50 years. And that goes back to Deaconess Hospital being built, which happened in the 1950s. This is a $30 million redevelopment of the corner of Memphis and Pearl, where St. Luke's Church is. And St. Luke's, if you ever look at the building, is actually 2 buildings. This is really interesting because it's what drove the price tag up. The church was built 100 some years ago and is built on field stone, very sturdy. Then they built a school adjacent to the building, and by adjacent I mean on the side of the building, then knocked out the walls in between them so that it expanded the interior of the sanctuary. But it wasn't built with the same foundation. So the school portion is actually sinking at a different rate from the church. The church is a little bit sturdier, but the school is on a different foundation. It's not even a full dugout basement. So that school structure needs to be removed. It needs to come off the church in order to save the sanctuary and the bell tower, which is what everybody thinks of when they think of the church.
Church, yeah.
But that means that we can't use historic tax credits from the state of Ohio. We can't access those funds because they only fund pure renovations, 100%. So in order to remove the school portion to keep the sanctuary, we have to look outside typical funding mechanisms like historic tax credits. which means the gap is really huge on this project 'cause we're trying to preserve a 100-year-old church in the process and develop new residential and commercial space. So filling that construction gap has been my focus for the last 2 years, and I'm really excited that we have gotten almost $6 million dedicated to that gap, which is going to make the project work. Feel really good. Old Brooklyn Community Development Corporation is leading the charge on this, and they're doing a fantastic job. Everybody in Old Brooklyn is lucky to have the team we have over there. They're working with an architecture firm, Desmond, and a financing firm, Tipping Point, who have put together this whole package that recently got underwriting, and we're looking to get started in the new year with the actual physical demolition and construction work.
How long do you think it'll take?
About 2 years,
About 2
maybe
years?
3. Obviously, we have to take down taking down the school portion is a little bit complicated because it was built adjacent. The walls are built, so you have to take that down a little more carefully. And there's a couple other buildings surrounding it that have to be removed as well. So then obviously you got to do some standard cleaning of the area around there.
Is that school portion still used? I'm not terribly familiar with it.
No, it's been closed for over a decade.
Okay.
The church was actually, they turned out the lights on the church, I think 2012 was the last time anybody used it. The last congregation left, and they couldn't afford to maintain it. The cost on maintaining these old buildings is astronomical, which really made the challenge even greater. There weren't any churches that were able to invest the money needed to save the building for religious purposes. The churches don't have that much. So reusing it in some kind of commercial capacity is what's going to help us, raise the funds to save the structure.
When you first became councilman, you pledged for better code enforcement for your houses, especially your rentals. 2 years in, how's that going, and where do you see that? Do you see that continuing on? It's just a project that almost never ends, huh?
No, I'm halfway done.
Really?
Yeah. I tried to get ahead of it because I wanted to try to get the whole project done in 3 years. But there are 9,000 houses in Ward 13, and I've surveyed over 4,500, so I've gotten just over half of them done. It's an exterior survey. I look at broken windows, dilapidated porches. I'm looking for missing gutters, standard visual things that are easy to identify. And I send letters out to everyone, regardless of whether there's a problem or not. And if there's not, it's a thank you letter. And if there's a minor issue, it notes minor issues. But through doing this, I've been able to put hundreds and hundreds of homeowners in touch with resources that are available to them, which I want people to know about. And I've also gotten a lot of property investors to pay attention. I get a lot of letters back saying, we took care of these 3 houses that you sent us letters on because an investor owned more than one house. So I'm getting a lot more investors to pay attention to the neighborhood. I hope to run the permit data to verify that this work is happening at a higher rate. But I do believe in code enforcement. I believe that housing value is the lifeblood of Old Brooklyn. We've never fell into the lowest value housing sales prices. So we've gotten out of the 2008 Great Recession, but I want us to excel. I want us to be more than a normal neighborhood. I want us to be a great neighborhood. So helping people with those housing issues is the number one thing we can do to shore up housing values, which I think will sustain the neighborhood for long term.
Let's switch gears a bit and talk safety if we can.
Sure.
Safety's always been a big topic in the city of every single ward for the council. Since signing on, what have you thought about better ways you could better keep your residents safer, keep the crime down, work with the police more, maybe even community organizations, things like that?
Yeah, I hate to say it, but it's bars, right? I've worked with Second District to shut down 3 bars since I was sworn in. And I know my predecessor, now the judge, the Honorable Kevin Kelly, shut down 2 or 3 just that I'm aware of. But those seem to be the hotbeds. All the shootings that we've had in recent history have been from bars that we know are trouble spots. There's good operators. I had a young lady who runs a bar in the neighborhood, and she told me that she knows her role in safety starts with the music she plays, the hours she's open, and her tolerance for her clientele. And I haven't had problems with her bar. She runs an upright establishment and she handles her business, and I don't have problems coming from there. It's the people who don't understand that aspect of the industry that we have problems. So I'm going to be working with 2nd District, and by the way, I couldn't ask for a better group of folks. 2nd District Police are fantastic. Commander Stocco over there and his whole crew do a great job, and I really appreciate them. But I am going to be spending more time with the bar owners, particularly the problematic ones, and if we have to shut them down, then so be it. But I also called the other ones in that area and said, hey, just so you know, there's going to be some enforcement action. That riffraff might come your way. Be on the lookout, because I really think a lot of it has to do with how those people choose to run their establishments.
Also, I'm thinking about too is I've seen a lot in the news about our youth, troubled youth getting into trouble with the law. What can we do to can anything be done on the council side to step in with our youth through programs or education to help kind of guide them to that right path?
Yeah, admittedly, this is a frustrating conversation because council's role in violence and violence prevention is to fund agencies in the city of Cleveland. And we fund the police department to be staffed at 1,500 patrol officers. And we don't have that right now. We have about, I think, 1,300, just shy. And hiring those 200 missing officers is not something I can do. It's frustrating because I do get the calls directly from residents who are concerned about safety. They see, they hear about, the 2 most recent shootings, and it troubles them as well, it should. But it's not something I can just put my finger on a button and solve that problem. I don't like to blame parenting or say that other people need to do their job better, because that's been the case since the world began. I believe Adam and Eve raised a kid named Cain, who wasn't a very good kid, right? I mean, troubled parenting and troubled kids goes back to the beginning of time. So that's not the problem. We need to properly staff the police department in this city so that they can be a visible presence, so that we can do traffic enforcement, so that people know that Cleveland is a place where laws will be adhered to. And when people ingest that and understand that, then I think a lot of the other problems sort of like calm themselves down. I think right now that we're so understaffed that we have a problem where we see people running, red lights and stop signs and there's no consequence. And that's not because the police aren't doing their jobs, it's because there's not enough of them. Yeah. The population of Cleveland has gone down, our square footage has not. So we have just as many streets with just as many cars that we still need to patrol. And I think that getting that number up to a number that the mayor agrees is needed, that the safety director agrees is needed, and that the chief of police agrees is needed is the number one thing that we can do. And I believe the city council is going to again fund a fully staffed police department.
Well, then outside of safety, what are some of the biggest challenges facing Ward 13 today?
Yeah. So Ward 13 is largely residential. We are not the nightlife. We're not the industrial valley. We've got a hospital and a few job centers, but more people drive out of Ward 13 for work and then come home than drive into Ward 13 to work. So we're primarily a residential neighborhood. And my wife and I bought our house in the neighborhood because we saw Old Brooklyn as a neighborhood where kids ride their bikes up and down the street, where there's a park, where the kids play together. And that is all happening. That is the wonderful news about Old Brooklyn. It is still a neighborhood where you can raise kids, grow old, enjoy your life. And we've got wonderful access to parks. We've got Low Park, which is sort of the central park of Old Brooklyn right in the middle, but we've also got Goodrow, we've got Archmere Park, we've got obviously Brookside Reservation to our north and the zoo, but there's also Harmony Park over there off Spring Road. And we've got this great opportunity for people that want a home at a reasonable rate where they can raise a family. And I think that Old Brooklyn is, in a lot of places, populated by second and third generation house occupants. Like, I've met people that live in their grandparents' house. That's a wonderful thing, and they stay in the neighborhood because that's the neighborhood where they're from. It's home, and that's what I hope people see Old Brooklyn as. It's a place to call home.
You like to do anything culture-wise or fun-wise to connect with your constituents? I don't know if you have any parties in the park or things like that.
Yeah. So every council person gets to do their councilmatic event, and everybody was kind of doing these block parties, these big extravagant parties, and I figured that Cleveland has a lot of those. There was a group of people in the neighborhood that did something called Pedal for Prizes. It was actually a fourth generation owner of a company, Speed Exterminating, John Young, who'd been doing this, and they had to take it off for the pandemic. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, can we bring Pedal for Prizes back in a big way? It's a free bike ride around the neighborhood for everybody that wants to show up, no restrictions of any kind. And you show up, you get a card, and you go around to the neighborhood and you get your card punched. And then you come back and you get raffle tickets. And we get all these donations. We give away bicycles. We gave away like a dozen bicycles this year. Games, kids stuff, tickets for shows, things for adults. And it's a wonderful event to get to see the neighborhood firsthand on a bicycle, get to know the community, and we'll be putting it on again this year. It's always the weekend before, I think it's Memorial Day in the spring, and we do that for the neighborhood, and it's a wonderful event. But Old Brooklyn has a lot of things that go on. The Community Development Corporation does events at parks around the neighborhood throughout the summer as well.
Someone who's just coming through Cleveland and are kind of curious about what's going on, how would you explain Old Brooklyn to them? How would you explain what we are if someone doesn't even know about Old Brooklyn?
Yeah. Old Brooklyn is a residential neighborhood in the city of Cleveland. We've got the zoo, borders us to the north, and Parma borders us to the south. We've got another municipality on our west and another municipality on our east. We're kind of a peninsula. I'm trying to see if anybody's interested in bringing back the south side as our designation. I was pacing my second daughter to sleep one night. She was like, under a year. And I was trying to get her to sleep, and it was winter, and I looked out my window and there was something flashing in the distance outside my window, and I couldn't figure out what it was, but it was winter and there were no leaves. And as I was walking in circles, I kept looking at it, and I got the binoculars. It was Tower City. My house sits due south of Tower City. And I realized I live on the south side of Cleveland. So I would say that Old Brooklyn is the south side neighborhood in Cleveland. We have historically been a neighborhood, a lot working class people, a lot of cops, firefighters, teachers live in Old Brooklyn. We've got doctors and lawyers. We're a middle class neighborhood and working class, and it's a great place to raise a family and live.
One thing I talk to all of your fellow colleagues about is reaching out to your constituents. Do you like going to the events and just shaking hands and talking with them over taking a phone call or receiving an email? Do you like actually that one-on-one interaction?
Yeah, I don't have to go out. They come to me. I was sitting at home the other day and a constituent knocked on my door. She wanted to share a letter with me, actually thanking the Community Relations Board for some work they did to help her with a neighbor. I live in the neighborhood, I shop in the neighborhood, I eat in the neighborhood, I run into people constantly. I do monthly ward meetings. I should probably put this out there, right? I do, I think December will be my 23rd consecutive monthly ward meeting. They're always the second Wednesday of the month, 6 p.m. at Estabrook. I have an office up at Estabrook Rec Center to have something in the neighborhood, super easy to get to if people want to talk. Got some room up there, a little table and a coffee pot if people need to get together and talk about anything. But the second Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m., I'm at Estabrook every single month and take whatever's on your mind, usually have a guest speaker. But I'm also available on Facebook and Twitter, and I'm pretty easy to find. You can just sort of Google me. There is another Kris Harsh in Cleveland. Hi, Kris. He lives in Tremont. Good dude. I found his wallet twice. No, other people found his wallet and contacted me thinking I'd lost my wallet. So don't bother him. Leave him alone. He's a good guy. But I think people can find me pretty easily.
Awesome. Easily accessible. A lot of things happening in Ward 13. Sounds like just a great neighborhood just to visit and enjoy. I know they have Honey Hut. Is Honey Hut there?
Oh, yeah. I should promote my local businesses, right? Yeah, we've got a Honey Hut and Jack Frost Donuts. So we've got dessert covered.
Yes.
I mean, okay, Jack Frost is dessert for breakfast, right? But we've also got, up and down Memphis, we've got the Blue Palm is a great Latino restaurant just opened up. They serve their hamburgers on a pineapple. It's amazing. We've got Dina's right down the street, one of the best wings and pizza spots in Cleveland. Been there for forever and a day, and everybody knows Dina's. It's a great place to go to catch a game. We've got more businesses up and down Memphis than I think a lot of people remember. It's very much, though, it's a local haunt. So a lot of people, we draw a lot of neighborhood traffic. But if you haven't been down in a while, come check it out. We got Opal on Pearl. Very nice bar, restaurant, does very good work. And there's just a lot of places up and down state and Pearl as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Ward 13 has it all, yes.
Metropolitan Coffee, I got a shout out to Deirdre. She lives in the neighborhood. She's got a great coffee shop over there too, as well as Six Shooter moved down from Collinwood. Cafe Miami. Got a lot of wonderful places to check out in Old Brooklyn.
Well, maybe if you're ever in Old Brooklyn, maybe you can maybe run into them in a coffee shop or
The Witch Museum.
The Witch Museum
of Witchcraft.
I've heard of this.
Which is legit. Like this is not Don't chuckle. This is a very legit enterprise. There was a guy who was the main practitioner of witchcraft, and he's got his entire collection. It's a very legitimate collection of witchcraft stuff. So check out the Witchcraft Museum. Very cool.
My son showed me a TikTok of that. I'm like, wait a minute, that's old Brooklyn.
Yeah,
it's video.
It's worth a visit. Absolutely. Check it out.
Awesome. Well, so much to do and see in Ward 13. This is awesome. If you ever call a cab or maybe get your windows washed, maybe Councilman Harsh will show up. You never know. He used to do that, so you never know.
I picked up Dennis Kucinich from the airport once and drove him to his office. So you never know who you might meet in a cab.
You never know. But I want to thank you so much for joining me today. We learned a lot about you and about Old Brooklyn neighborhood. And I want to thank you for watching, too. Thank you so much for watching Catching Up with Council. I'm your host, Dan Monroe, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.